May I speak to you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. 40 years ago, I lived in Denver. 40 years ago, I played softball a lot better than I do now. And on this particular team, which was fast pitch, there was a fellow. He was not known to me. He just kind of showed up in the draft. Pretty soon he was sitting there, and we were doing our thing, and I asked him what position he played. Thank God he said pitcher, because we didn't have one. He gets out, and we play the season. We do pretty well. But what I didn't know about this guy was that he was about to take me into the Lutheran faith, because he was a pastor. One of the things I do when I prepare these sermons, and I'm sure Kenny does it, and I'm sure James does it, and I'm sure Drew does it, is to look at what others have said about a given topic. That's how we draw our ideas. As I was researching this week's topic, I read a sermon that was given by a nondescript fellow that probably nobody ever heard of. Trouble was that 40 years ago, that was the man who led me into the Lutheran faith. And he was good. And I called him, and I asked him, can I use little bits and little pieces of your sermon and mine? He says, absolutely. And I thank you. Y'all like flashback movies? You know what they are? The other night, there was a classic flashback movie on. You ever seen Yankee Doodle Dandy? One of my favorites. James Cagney played the role, and I love James Cagney. I mean, yeah. But he's invited to the White House and sits with the president and tells the story of his life. When the story's over, we are brought back to the present time when Cohan is given the Medal of Honor. Now, in our gospel lesson this afternoon, we have the classic flashback of all times. We are sitting in the middle of a gospel lesson teaching us about the teachings of Christ, the stories of Christ, with absolutely no consideration whatsoever about John the Baptist until this passage. Now, there are a lot of theological ideas floating around out there, some of which say that this was a passage added in by another writer at another time. Maybe it was, I don't know, I wasn't there. But it is certainly out of the context of what we have been exploring the last several weeks in the liturgy and in the book of Mark. Now this morning, see, I'm really excited now because we took to the common lectionary, I can go to Trinity Episcopal Cathedral every Sunday morning and hear what I'm going to preach about that afternoon, and man, I might get an idea. Well, Don and I looked at each other this morning and said, where in the hell is this going? Because we didn't know. I've never heard such an off-the-wall sermon in my life. But it just kind of tickled me, and it gave me a lot of confidence in what I had put together here. So anyway, we had fun this morning, to say the least. I think we did anyway. Since the beginning, prophets have more than not lived on a collision course with the powers that be. Let's take a look back. Anybody want to argue that Desmond Tutu had issues with the African governments? Anybody want to argue that John the Baptist did not exactly fit the mold asked of him by the Hebrew people or by Rome? No. I think what we will see is a constant theme. John didn't dress like the folks. He most certainly didn't eat like the folks. And when asked, he'd give you a piece of his mind. and he was none too politically correct. And then there is the story of Herod. What in the world was this guy thinking? Well, he heard John, and he understood John, perhaps, and just maybe liked John. We don't know that for sure. We can assume it. We can draw it from Scripture, but we can't prove it. Jesus, we've learned, came along and when asked, said, hey, render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's. That's what you're supposed to do. Be a good guy. Don't raise Cain. Jesus didn't raise Cain much. He didn't have to. He just had to be there because his aura was that great. He doesn't say to us, raise Cain. Neither did Martin Luther King. He said, protest within the law. Make your point known. But don't go out and try to be a hero and shoot somebody or fight somebody or make a bunch of noise because your message is going to be lost. Yeah, that's what he said. You know, the Apostle Paul in his writings counsels Christians to be loyal and obedient citizens. I'm not quite sure we all follow that admonition, but that's what the man said. Sometimes, especially in the German and Scandinavian state churches, they've gotten a little bit too cozy with the powers that be, and the prophetic voice and presence has been muted or forgotten in the process. Hence, at crucial times, the church has failed to speak the necessary prophetic word. And they should hold civil authorities more accountable, but they don't. Are we doing that here in the United States? The far right would have you believe that, but is that really what they're doing? I don't think so. Consider today's gospel. Here we have a different picture altogether. A prophet and a prophet's word ending catastrophically nonetheless. It's a most interesting story because once again, sandwiched in between Jesus having sent his disciples out on a mission of preaching, teaching, and healing, and then the return from that mission, this story pops into the middle. Now, when read for the first time, it might not seem to have anything to do whatsoever with what precedes and follows it, but a more careful reading certainly convinces us otherwise. Notice that the story actually begins with reports and rumors of the work of Jesus and his disciples. And it presupposes that John has already been executed, since Jesus is regarded by the powers that be as possibly being John the Baptizer raised from the dead, or Elijah, or any number of other Israelite prophets. Indeed, Herod, the Mark writer tells us, seems to have mistaken Jesus' identity, thinking he was a resurrected version of John. The reason for this, we note, is the rumor mill reporting about the mission of Jesus and his disciples, their preaching, teaching, and healing. Now, before we go any further into this tragic story of John's beheading, it is necessary for us to clarify a couple of details concerning Herod. Herodias and the daughter. According to biblical scholars, this particular Herod is not the same Herod the Great who ordered the slaughter of the innocent children around the time of Jesus' birth. Rather, this is Herod Antipas, a son of the older Herod. According to the secular Jewish historian of the time, Josephus, Herod Antipas, while on one occasion visiting Rome, seduced his brother Philip's wife, Herodias. Herodias likely agreed to the seduction with the hope that her political influence and fortunes would improve. And then, they both dumped their spouses and wandered off into the sunset together. Nice pair of folks. But anyway. Now, the text leaves room for interpretation. regarding the daughter. One reading of the text has it that the daughter's name was also Herodias. However, likely the more correct reading is the daughter of Herodias, in which case her name would have been Salome, not Herodias. I remember preaching this before and I said Salami and everybody laughed. Oh. Now that we've clarified that, we can go on with the story. When John the Baptizer learned of this new political union between Herod and Herodias, he did the right thing as a faithful and holy Jewish prophet. He spoke out against the marriage. John told Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." John was referring here, of course, to the two passages from the Torah, both in the book of Leviticus, chapter 18, verse 16, and chapter 20, verse 21, wherein it is basically regarded as an act of adultery and publicly disgraceful, making those involved ritually impure, and the consequences were that such a marriage would not be blessed with children. It obviously took considerable courage on the part of John to speak as a prophet to one of the highest political authorities of his day. Yet John does not shrink from such a duty. I said before, John was a pretty gutsy guy. He didn't know from politically correct. He stated his mind and stated his beliefs. He is the Lord's prophet, and so he faithfully does what a prophet is called to do: be God's trustworthy spokesperson. This is the case in every time and every place, and John, as a prophet, suffered the tragic consequences of speaking and living by God's prophetic word. Just as in our day, prophets like Martin Luther King Jr. and Oscar Romero did. So we too are called on to speak a prophetic word in the face of evil and injustice. So we too, like John, Martin, and Oscar, are called even to die if necessary for speaking and living by God's prophetic word. Now, there's a lot of hassle and a lot of mayhem going into that prophetic word. And what does God say and what does God mean? I will tell you this from my perspective. If there is one single human being in this world who is oppressed, it is my God-given duty and my God-given right to defend that human being. I really do not care who it may be, of what race, religion, gender. It doesn't matter. I've been through wars since 1960s. And I'm not afraid to do them again. And I'll never be afraid to do them again. I hope that I won't be beheaded, but there is ISIS. I suppose I could be. After John speaks his prophetic word to Herod, the latter does not act on it immediately. Remember now, he was protecting John, light John. Ironically, Mark goes on to say that Herod listened to John. Why is this so? Well, most likely deep within Herod's heart, mind, and soul, he knew very well what John spoke was the truth. That conscience can be a pain in our rears, can't it? And he knew John was a righteous and holy man. So instead of being offended at John and wanting to punish or do away with him, Herod, says Mark, protected him. As one's called to be God's prophetic voice, this is a sign of encouragement. The truth of God's word has the power to touch even the most corrupt politicians. Well, if this is not at least one of the lessons we learn from Bishop Tutu's words on life under the apartheid regime of South Africa, I believe it is. Bishop Tutu was an authentic prophet in that nation, and that nation's political leaders took his words and his life to heart and acted upon them to end their racist policies. Never lose hope in the power of God's prophetic word working in your life, my life, and in the life of even the world's most powerful politicians. However, in the case of John, we learn that Herodias did take offense at John's prophetic words. The Mark writer says she had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. Then, ever watchful of an opportune time, bingo! Herod threw a birthday party for all the political luminaries. So as did the evening unfold, and everyone was thoroughly wined and dined, and their ambitions were way down because the booze was taking its effect, scheming, plotting Herodias sends out her own daughter to dance like some seductive prostitute in front of all those big wigs. Herod, likely seeing how captivated his audience was by her dancing, wanted to impress them all, so he ups the ante and becomes a foolishly boastful and proud politician, making a blank check promise no astute politician in their right mind should or would ever make. Says he'd give Salome anything her heart desired. The daughter, perhaps rather surprised by such a promise, as well as embarrassed and humiliated by being coerced into dancing in such an exhibitionist manner, doesn't quite know what to say. So she goes off to consult her mother, having nursed her grudge against John to get the most out of it, now sees her opportunity, tells her daughter to ask for John the Baptizer's head. Is this not another tragic lesson which all of us need to take to heart? When one chooses to nurse one's grudges, when one chooses not to forgive, then the door of tragedy and evil opens even wider. What starts out as anger and taking offense grows into hatred and murder. What a bombshell that request must have been for Herod. Oh my word, what do I do now? Well, he couldn't torque off the folks that were there because they were all his supporters and the big guys. So he decides, okay, we will do this. And so he calls his soldier, and his soldier goes to the prison in which John was at the time, lops off his head, and brings it back to Herodias and Salome on a plate. Wonderful. It's probably the reason ISIS is having so much fun with that thing. That could all too easily endanger Rome's political and military control of Galilee had he not done that, because then the other people would have doubted. And John was executed. Once again, our story bids us to look at ourselves through the person of Herod. Have we, like him, not made foolish promises to impress others? Promises that most likely we too have lived up to regret, perhaps for the rest of our lives. I have, you have, we all have. In this horrible story of John's untimely death, no one is really a winner. John, least of all. For he is put to death. Herod, most likely, he's destined to live with a guilty conscience for the rest of his life. Herodias, for mostly like such a request as hers, now succeeded in eroding the level of trust between herself and Herod, and perhaps between herself and her daughter, to such an extent that the marriage relationship and mother-daughter relationship probably suffered. Who lost? John died. But everybody else in this stage play gets to suffer with it for a lifetime. Isn't that kind of like what we do when we're overly mad at somebody and can't learn to forgive them? Yeah, exactly. It's very easy, folks. This story is, on the surface, about the death of a prophet. It's on the surface an innocent story about somebody being mad at somebody else and killing them. But it goes a lot deeper than that. It tells us, point blank, through allusion, through metaphor, exactly what happens when our passions, our anger, perhaps our hatred gets carried away. It's subtle. You don't realize it, you don't see it, you don't know it until you've read the story several times and consulted any number of sermons to find out that, hey, Herod could be any of us. We're not that good, so John, we could not be. But anyway, Herod, we could all be. Herodias? I don't know. You guys are too good for Herodias, but anyway, she was a sneaky thing. But at the end of the day, when everything is put down and put away, and when you're sitting there pondering this sermon on your own, Could you, in your craziest, wildest dreams, play out the role of Herod? Amen.